Formula One's all-new 2026 cars are just 6 months out from hitting the track for the first time, and we're getting more and more leaks and information about the development of these cars. Those Venturi Tunnels that made the cars glued to the racetrack are getting a complete overhaul for the 2026 regs, and it appears that these new cars will be a game changer for F1 teams and drivers in general. These cars are getting toned down seriously, but why does it matter? And how will it affect the drivers, teams, and the racing? Let's evaluate these latest technical scoops and see how the overall racing will be with these 2026 cars. Let's start with the basics as to what ground effect really was in the regulations we're still currently in. Ground effect was Formula One's X factor that made these cars corner like they were on rails. In 2022, F1 introduced the Venturi Tunnels that created a low pressure zone that in return sucks the car down to the track like glue, generating massive amounts of downforce without relying massively on the front and rear wings. The idea behind this move was to eliminate massive amounts of dirty air, encouraging more wheel-to-wheel racing, requiring less of a pace delta. On paper, that sounded all great, but as we headed into 2022, that's when the problems started arising. Even though we did get better racing, 9 out of 10 teams struggled with the porpoising problem, bouncing heavily down the straights. The cars themselves had to be set up too stiff as they were running too close to the ground, which made the impact of the bouncing even worse on drivers. Not to mention ground effect meant wet races were not an option due to the spray these cars kicked up due to the diffusers working so hard to generate downforce. We recently saw this at Silverstone, where the drivers had zero idea where they or their rivals were on track. Can't really blame them, as onboard footage looks like the drivers were driving underwater. The FIA has heard these complaints from drivers, seen how the racing has progressed over the years, and are bringing in this big overhaul for 2026, toning down the cars massively. For next year, teams no longer have to deal with these Venturi Tunnels. We are going to have flat-like floors once again with a much less powerful diffuser. Early estimates was a downforce cut of about 30%, but as the regulations have evolved, that number has now dropped to about 15%. For 2026, the FIA estimates a lap time drop of something between 1 and 2 seconds per lap. While 2 seconds to our eyes might not seem as much of a difference, in Formula One that is a pretty drastic change. These cars will still look fast on track, with it being less reliant on the floor for downforce and grip could result in the cars looking more alive. But we definitely will notice a change in timing if you keep up with lap times track to track. Some tracks we might see a bigger drop, like in Monza and Hungary. As I mentioned before, with the floor generating much less downforce means the teams can't rely just on the floor for grip, which means they're going to have to lean more into the front and rear wings and the active aerodynamics involved, switching between the Z and X modes, but obviously lower drag on the straights and higher downforce in the corners. Now let's talk about the impact the 2026 regulations will have on the drivers. As I stated before, ground effect meant the cars had to be set up super low and super stiff, which for the drivers was really unpleasant, especially on their backs. But the 2026 cars, not only with performance, these cars also should be much easier to drive and easier on the backs of these drivers with much softer suspension. The ride quality should improve drastically. We might actually have drivers get out of the car smiling rather than frown in pain. Now this will affect the cars in high-speed corners because those Venturi Tunnels generated a lot of downforce, which made the cars stick to the ground, allowing drivers to just pull flat out in many of these corners which weren't flat out before. Curb usage will be much more significant with the 2026 cars. Ride heights will be much higher versus 2025 cars, so the possibility of curbs damaging the underfloor will be less. Hence, will open up a variety of racing lines as well. With that, every driver on the grid is going to have to adapt their driving style too. Most drivers on the grid do have experience of driving cars before ground effect was introduced. But with these 2026 cars, active aerodynamics will be introduced, which is going to feel and act very different. Next year's cars will feel a lot less grippy to what they've been used to, and 3 drivers to put on high notice would be Lewis Hamilton, Fernando Alonso, and Nico Hülkenberg, 3 drivers who have driven cars without the DRS. Lewis Hamilton's driving style of trail braking and leaning a lot on the rear end to turn the car did not work that well in the current regulations we're in right now. But the 2026 cars will be a lot harder to adapt, and the more experienced drivers will surely have a leg up on the rest of the grid. For the drivers, it's going to be a game of adaptability, and the more experience you have, the easier the transition will be. Even drivers like Verstappen and Leclerc will have their struggles, but they have shown how quickly they can master a new driving style with the 2022 cars. Now for the teams, these 2026 cars are going to be a whole new ballgame. Ground effect flaws made the current cars super complex, expensive, and very sensitive to even the slightest of changes. Setup mattered even more than upgrades, as balance was vital for maximum performance rather than the maximum downforce the car was able to generate. That made the current cars really weird to drive, especially was hard to achieve a balanced compromise between high and low speed, and usually meant drivers couldn't exploit different setup options like we saw in previous years. A bad upgrade would throw the car all over the place. Best examples are Ferrari, who were kings of doing this many times. But with these 2026 cars, the setup window will be much bigger. Understeer will be better, with the new cars being smaller and lighter. Pirelli is also shrinking the tyres both in terms of width and diameter, which should give us a car that will be more agile through the corners, though the grip and durability of the tyres will remain the same. This will be a good thing for wet races, because smaller tyres means reduced contact patch, resulting in less spray coming from tyres. And the toned down diffuser also should kick up less amounts of spray overall. There is also a possibility of fewer pit stops, which actually was the case in the previous regulations as well. It was the dirty air that was causing a lot of teams to go through tyres. So with these new regulations, hopefully less dirty air and better racing, I won't mind fewer pit stops as long as we have more on-track action, which is the aim with these regulations. So with the underfloor not being the biggest generator of downforce on these new F1 cars, will result in a real game changer for some that struggled with the ground effect cars. Lewis Hamilton in particular is positively looking towards next year's car, as he feels it will be better suited to his driving style. That will be a real test for him to see whether he's lost it or not. Surely drivers like Fernando and Max are not going to take too much time in adapting as well. They usually do adapt pretty quickly. The learning curve will be big next year, and that will result in different driving styles and racing lines appearing. Overall, next year's aero rules does look genuinely interesting, and if teams get it right, we should have better racing. But the engines are probably my biggest concern going into 2026, because as of right now, next year looks like an engines race rather than an engines plus aero race. But what do you guys think? I'm very much into your thoughts and perspectives in the comments section down below. And on your way down, don't forget to subscribe to the channel to get notified of our future uploads, to keep yourselves up to date about the 2025 and 2026 Formula 1 seasons.